The wind was a blade. Eli Ward pulled the collar of his sheepskin coat tighter, but the cold found its way in, sharp and personal. It was a cold that got into the bones, a cold that reminded a man he was just meat wrapped around a skeleton. Stonewall, his horse, snorted a cloud of steam, the sound muffled by the heavy fall of snow. He had been a scout for the Union, a lifetime ago. He had learned to read the land when the land was trying to kill him. Now, in the Montana Territory in the 1880s, the land was still trying. It was just quieter about it. Eli was on a supply run, or what passed for one. 2 days riding to the nearest passable crossing, just to find the general store closed up tight against the blizzard. He was returning with half of what he needed and twice the trouble, the snow piling in drifts that made the high pass a misery. He was a reclusive man. He preferred the silence of the canyons and the company of his horse to the noise of men. His ranch was tucked away, shielded by pine and rock, a place a man could forget the world and be forgotten by it. This storm suited him. It built his walls higher. He smelled the wreck before he saw it, not just the wet, splintered pine, but the metallic tang of blood freezing on the air. Stonewall tossed his head, wary. Eli reined him in, his gaze sweeping the pass. His hand, wrapped in a worn leather glove, rested near the butt of the Winchester in his saddle scabbard. A scout's habit. There, just below the ridge, was the ruin. A high-flyer stagecoach, one of the big ones, lay on its side like a slaughtered animal. Its bright yellow paint was stark against the white. The front axle was snapped clean. One horse, still tangled in its harness, was dead. The others were gone, likely run off or taken. He dismounted, the snow crunching deep under his boots. The wind howled through the wreckage. Luggage was scattered, trunks broken open, their contents, calico dresses, men's suits, flapping uselessly in the snow. He saw the driver first, face down near the coach door, a dark stain spreading from his back. Shot. The guard, a younger man Eli recognized from the crossing, was slumped over the boot, his shotgun still in its frozen grip. Robbery. A bad one. Eli moved with a quiet, practiced economy. He checked the men, both cold, dead for hours. He scanned the snow for tracks, but the blizzard was already smoothing the edges, hiding the story. He was about to mount up, to ride away from this cold, dead place, when he heard it. Not a sound, but the absence of one. A held breath. He stopped. He listened past the wind. There! A whimper. It came from beneath a pile of heavy canvas mailbags. He drew his pistol, a heavy Colt, and moved toward the bags. Come on out, he said. His voice was rough, rusted from disuse. I ain't part of this. The bags stirred. A hand, pale and trembling, pushed a stiffened corner of canvas aside. A woman's face peered out. She was young, her eyes wide with a terror so deep it had frozen her features. She looked at him, then at the gun in his hand. Put it away, a second voice said. This one stronger, harder. From the wreckage of the coach itself, another woman emerged, pushing aside a splintered piece of the door. She was older, dark-haired, with a shawl pulled tight. She held no weapon, but her gaze was just as steady as Eli's. We mean no harm, the older woman said. They're gone, the men who did this. How many? Eli asked, lowering the Colt but not holstering it. 5, the woman said. They took the strongbox and the horses. A third woman was climbing out from behind the older one. This one was all fire and shadow, with red hair plastered to her head by the wet snow and a dress of fine green silk, now torn and muddy. She looked angry, not scared. And a 4th, the older one said, nodding back to the mailbags. The girl under the canvas finally crawled out. She was the youngest, maybe not even 20. She was dressed plainly, like a farmer's daughter, but her face was pale as milk. 4 of them, alive, hiding. He looked them over. They were half frozen, soaked through. The youngest one was shivering so hard her teeth clicked. The angry one, the redhead, was rubbing her arms. her eyes darting to the dead driver and then away. The oldest one just watched him, and there was one more. She had been silent, hidden in the shadow of the overturned coach. She was smaller than the others, wrapped in a dark, ragged blanket. She clutched a small bundle to her chest. No, not 4. There were 5. Eli corrected himself as the woman with the bundle stepped clear. She was Mexican, he guessed, her face etched with grief. His count was wrong. 4 women, not 5. The bundle she held was just rags. "You're freezing," Eli stated. It was a flat fact, not an offer of comfort. "They left us," the young one whispered. Her voice was thin, like dry grass. "They shot the drivers and they looked at us, but the leader said we weren't worth the time." "Lydia, hush," the older woman commanded. Eli noted the name, Lydia. "We need shelter," the older woman said, stepping forward. The snow crunched under her worn boots. "Just for the night, until the storm passes? My name is Rosa," she said, as if that should mean something. "We can pay." "With what?" Eli said, glancing at the looted trunks. The red-haired woman, who watched him with sharp, assessing eyes, spoke up. "We have some things. Jewelry. They didn't take everything." "I don't want jewelry," Eli said. He looked up at the sky. The clouds were lead gray and dropping fast. Another hour, maybe 2, and this pass would be death. To stay here was to die. To go back the way they came was impossible. That left only one way. His way. He was a man who had built his life on solitude. He had cleared the trees, raised the cabin, and dug the well just so he would not have to deal with the complications of other people. And now, the storm had brought him 4. He looked at Lydia, the young one, who seemed to be in shock. He looked at the fiery one, who looked like she could handle a knife. He looked at the quiet one, the Mexican woman, who had not said a word, just staring into the snow. And he looked at Rosa, the oldest, who met his gaze without flinching. He saw the fear, yes, but he also saw the something violent they had escaped. It wasn't just the robbery. It was in their eyes, in the way they huddled together. A line of defense against the world. The redhead had a fresh bruise blooming on her cheekbone. Lydia's dress was torn at the shoulder. Not from the wreck. He let out a long breath. The steam plumed in front of his face. "I've got 1 horse and a mule," he said gruffly. "My ranch is 6 miles down." "It'll be a hard ride." Rosa closed her eyes for just a second, a silent prayer of thanks. "We can manage," she said. Eli nodded, turning back to Stonewall. "No, you can't, but you'll try." He turned back. The silent one. He pointed with his chin. "What's her name?" Rosa hesitated. "Claire. Her name is Claire." "And the redhead?" The woman answered for herself. "Annabelle." The ride back was a frozen hell. He had pulled the dead driver's heavy oilcloth coat from the wreck and given it to Claire, the silent one. He put Lydia and Rosa on Stonewall, the horse solid enough to carry 2, though they were cramped. He put Annabelle and Claire on the pack mule, an animal with a mean temper and a steady foot. Eli himself walked, leading Stonewall, breaking the trail through the deepening drifts. He moved with the relentless pace of a man who knew the cost of stopping. The wind was a physical force, trying to push them off the narrow canyon trail. The snow was no longer falling in flakes, but in a solid, blinding sheet. Twice, the mule slipped. Annabelle cursed. A low, sharp sound, but Claire just clung on, her face buried in the woman's back. Lydia, the preacher's daughter, started to fade. Her head slumped, and Rosa had to grip her tight to keep her from sliding off the saddle. "Keep her awake," Eli ordered over the wind. "We're trying," Rosa called back, her voice strained. Eli didn't look back. He just kept walking. He knew this terrain. He knew the dip in the ridge, the stand of aspen that marked the turn, the sound the wind made when it funneled through the canyon that led to his land. He focused on that, one step, then the next. The women were a burden, a complication he did not need. He felt the familiar pull of isolation, the desire to be shed of them, to be alone again in his quiet cabin. He could have ridden past the wreck. He could have pretended not to see them. But he had been a scout. And you didn't leave people to freeze, not even people who carried trouble like a scent. It was full dark, the kind of blackness that only exists in a blizzard. When they finally cleared the canyon, the trees opened up, and the women saw the ranch. It was not much. A small, sturdy cabin of thick-cut pine, chinked tight against the weather. A solid barn, larger than the house, and a paddock. The ranch was tucked into a bend of the valley, pressed hard against the bank of a frozen river. Behind it, shadowed canyons and tall pines rose up like a fortress wall. It was the most isolated place they had ever seen, a dot of light in a universe of white. Eli led the animals to the barn. "Get inside," he grunted, nodding to the cabin. "Fire's dead, but the wood is dry. Stove, left of the door." The 4 women stumbled from the animals, their legs stiff and numb. They half carried, half dragged each other to the cabin door, shoulders hunched against the final assault of the wind. Eli took his time with the animals. He rubbed Stonewall down, gave him and the mule fresh hay and a measure of oats. They had earned it. The barn was cold, but it was dry, and the smell of hay and leather was a comfort. It was his space. He stayed there for a long time, listening to the storm try to tear the roof off. He thought about the cabin, only 50 yards away. It was his home, and it was full of them, full of their fear, their secrets, and their scent. He felt the old, familiar warning rise in him, the temptation, not just to the flesh, though that was part of it. He was a man, and he had been alone for a long time. It was the temptation of entanglement, the mess of other lives. He banked his own need. He would sleep in the barn, in the hayloft. It was safer. For them, and for him. When he finally went to the cabin, carrying a sack of potatoes and a frozen side of venison, the scene inside stopped him at the door. The storm had sealed them in. The wind shrieked, and snow was already drifting against the single window. But inside, there was warmth. Rosa had managed to get the cast-iron stove roaring. A kettle was steaming on top. The 4 women were gathered around it, stripped of their wet outer layers, which were hung on pegs by the door, already steaming. They were a strange sight. Lydia, in her simple, damp underskirt and blouse, looked like a lost child. Annabelle, the redhead, was in her silk, now stained, but she wore it like armor. Claire, the quiet one, had not taken off the driver's oilcloth coat, and she sat on a low stool, staring into the flames. Rosa was tending to Lydia, rubbing her hands, her face a mask of worry. The tension in the small room was thick enough to cut. It was the tension of distrust, of shared trauma, of guilt. They were a pack of wounded animals, forced into a strange den, and he was the wolf who owned it. They all looked up when he entered. 4 pairs of eyes, all different. Fear, defiance, numbness, and, from Lydia, a quiet, unnerving curiosity. She watched him as he moved. He was not a large man, but he was solid, built of rawhide and resolve. His face was weathered, bearded, and his eyes were the color of the sky before the snow. He moved without wasted effort, setting the meat on the rough-hewn table, checking the wood box. He was, Lydia thought, the most dangerous and the safest thing she had ever seen. "I'll sleep in the barn," he announced, not looking at any of them. "There's bedding in the chest, potatoes in the sack, meat for the pot. Don't go outside, for any reason." He turned to leave. "Mr. Rosa said. He paused, his hand on the door latch. We don't know how to thank you." "Don't," Eli said. "Just be gone when the storm breaks." He shut the door, and the heavy bar dropped into place from the inside, slid by Rosa's steady hand. He made his bed in the loft, the hay scratching through his long johns, but he could not sleep. The wind was too loud, and the silence from the cabin was louder. Later, he went back. He told himself it was to bring them the last of the coffee from his saddlebags. The smell of venison stew filled the cabin. They were eating, seated around the table, spoons clicking against tin bowls. They ate like refugees, fast and silent. Eli set the coffee tin on the table. "We thank you, Mr. Ward, Rosa said. He noted she had found his name, probably from a book or a brand inspection paper on the wall. He just nodded, pouring himself a cup of water from the bucket. You're a scout, Lydia said, her voice soft. He looked at her. She wasn't looking at him, but at a small, framed paper on the wall. His discharge from the Union Army. I was, he said. What happened to them? Claire asked. Her voice was a low rasp, the first time he'd heard it. The men who, before... Eli took a slow drink of water. He could feel Annabelle's eyes on him. Robbers. Killed the drivers. Took the horses, he said. Is that all you think they were? Annabelle asked. Her voice was sharp, edged with something brittle. Just robbers? Eli met her gaze. The bruise on her cheek was darker now, purple and ugly. I think they were men who took what they wanted. And what about you? Annabelle challenged. What do you want, Mr. Ward? Annabelle, Rosa warned. I want the storm to end, Eli said, his voice flat. He looked at the stew they were eating. You shared fragments of your past. I'll share one of mine. I don't like questions. And I don't like company. Annabelle held his gaze. Then don't ask questions you won't like the answers to. Eli nodded slowly, a truce of sorts. He finished his water, put the tin cup down, and turned to the door. He spent the night in the barn, but sleep was a stranger. The wind howled like a grieving woman. He lay awake, the Colt pistol near his hand, listening to the sounds of the ranch, sorting the groan of the beams from the shriek of the blizzard. He thought of the 4 women. Lydia, the fallen preacher's daughter. Rosa, the weary mother hen. Claire, the silent, grieving ghost. And Annabelle, the courtesan. He didn't know it for a fact, but he'd seen women like her in towns after the war, silk dresses and hard eyes. He drifted into a shallow, cold sleep, filled with images of snow and blood. He woke hours later. The wind had dropped, but the silence that replaced it was heavy, suffocating. The fire in the cabin would be dying. The cold would creep in. He pulled on his boots and coat. It was a chore, an act of duty. Keep the fire, keep them from freezing. Then, in the morning, or the day after, whenever the snow stopped, they would leave. He crossed the yard. The snow was waist deep, a solid, unbroken white under a moon hidden by clouds. He eased the cabin door open. The bar was up. They hadn't locked him out. The cabin was dark, save for the dull red glow from the stove's grate. The air was warm and thick, smelling of sleep, wet wool, and something else. Fear. He saw them in the gloom. They had taken the bedding from the chest. Rosa and Claire were on his cot, pressed together for warmth. Annabelle was in a bedroll near the hearth. Lydia was in the other bedroll, the one closest to the door. He moved silently, a scout's tread. He opened the stove, the small iron door creaking softly. He added 2 heavy logs, positioning them to catch slow. He poked the embers, and a small flame licked up. He closed the door, the latch clicking shut. He turned to leave, a shadow moving through the dark. Mr. Ward. The whisper was so soft he thought the wind had tricked him. He stopped. It was Lydia. She had risen up on one elbow in her bedroll. In the faint glow of the stove, he could see the pale shape of her face, her eyes wide and fixed on him. He waited. She looked past him, at the door, at the night outside. Then she looked at the dying fire, at the other women sleeping fitfully. She looked back at him, a man outlined against the cold. She whispered again, her voice cracking with a strange, desperate need that was part dare, part dream, and part broken plea. All 4 of you, get in. Eli Ward froze. The logs hissed in the stove. The wind howled outside, a lonely, desolate sound. He did not know if she was talking to the cold, to God, or to him. The dawn light was the color of a fresh bruise, pale gray and purple, filtering through the unending fall of snow. Eli Ward stood in the knee-deep drift beside the cabin, his axe rising and falling with a steady, punishing rhythm. The air was so cold it seized the moisture in his lungs. Each breath was a gasp, but he didn't feel it. He swung the axe, splitting the pine rounds he had cut last fall. The sharp thunk of the steel biting into frozen wood was the only sound, a counterpoint to the words that had echoed in his head all night. "All four of you, get in." He stopped, the axe buried in the chopping block. He leaned on the handle, his shoulders aching, sweat freezing on his brow. He had left the cabin immediately after she whispered it. He had not answered, had not looked back. He had retreated to the barn, to the cold safety of the hayloft, his mind reeling. What had she meant? Lydia, the preacher's daughter. She had looked at him, but her words were strange. "All four of you." Was she talking to the storm? Was she delirious with fever and cold? Or was it something else? A plea? An invitation? He shook his head, angry at the thought. He was a fool. She was a girl, half mad with fear. He was a man who had sought isolation, and this was the price of breaking his own rule. He yanked the axe free and set another round. He swung again, harder, the impact jarring his arms to the sockets. He tried to clear his mind, to focus on the grain of the wood, the burn of his muscles, the sharp, clean scent of pine. But the whisper remained, tangled up with the memory of Annabelle's defiant eyes, Rosa's quiet endurance, and Claire's terrifying stillness. 4 women, 4 troubles, 1 small cabin. He worked until the sun was a weak suggestion in the sky, until a new, towering pile of firewood stood ready. He was trying to exhaust the confusion, to replace the heat in his mind with the ache of hard labor. But his thoughts lingered, unwelcome, on the cabin and the young woman who had whispered in the dark, inside. The tension was a physical thing. The air was stale, thick with the smell of unwashed bodies, fear, and the simmering pot of thin venison stew. 4 days had passed since the wreck, 4 days trapped by the blizzard, which had not let up for a single hour. The snow was piled high against the cabin's single window, plunging the room into a perpetual twilight. Rosa, her face etched with a weariness that went beyond the storm, stirred the pot. She was trying to impose order, stretching their dwindling food. Annabelle paced the short length of the cabin, from the door to the hearth, her torn silk dress whispering against the rough floor. She was a caged animal, her fiery energy turning brittle and mean. Lydia sat on the cot, her hands clasped in her lap, staring at nothing. Claire was by the stove, polishing a tin cup with a rag, her movements small, repetitive, and silent. "Will you stop that?" Annabelle snapped, her voice cracking. She whirled on Claire. "That endless rubbing, it's driving me mad." Claire's hands went still. She did not look up. "She's just keeping busy," Rosa said, her voice placating. "We all should. Busy doing what?" Annabelle gestured to the gray light at the window. "Waiting? He's not coming back, is he? The men from the coach. They're out there. Or that sheriff." "Hush," Rosa said. "You'll frighten Lydia." "She should be frightened," Annabelle shot back. She turned her glare on Lydia. "We all should. Stop sitting there looking like a lost lamb. It won't save you when they come." Lydia flinched, a small, wounded movement. She wrapped her arms around herself. "Leave her be, Annabelle," Rosa said, her voice sharpening. "She has suffered enough." "We've all suffered," Annabelle said, her laugh ugly. "What makes her so special? Because she's pure, is that it? Still clinging to what her preacher father told her?" "I am not pure," Lydia whispered. The words were so quiet they were almost lost, but they cut through the tension like a razor. Annabelle stopped pacing. Rosa turned from the stove. Lydia looked up, her eyes dark, not with fear, but with a terrible, hollowed-out shame. "My father, he is a preacher. He spoke of grace, but there was no grace for me." She told them. Her voice was flat, recounting a story she had told herself 1,000 times in the dark. The new preacher who had come to their town, Reverend Pike. A married man, with a voice like warm honey and hands that promised salvation. He had sought her out, praised her piety, her quiet spirit. He told her she was special. He told her God had meant for them to find each other. He seduced her in the vestry, on a pallet of old hymnals. And when her belly began to swell, He had turned his face from her. He had stood in the pulpit and preached a sermon on the wickedness of fallen women, his eyes passing over her where she sat in the front pew. Her father, a man who loved God more than his own blood, had disowned her. He had called her an abomination and cast her out. The child had come too early. Still and blue in a rented room in a town she did not know, she had buried it herself. "I was not running to anywhere," Lydia finished, her voice breaking. "I was just running. The stagecoach was the last of my money." Silence filled the cabin. Annabelle looked away, her anger broken, replaced by something that looked like recognition. Rosa closed her eyes, her hand gripping the spoon so tightly her knuckles were white. It was into this silence that Eli entered. He kicked the snow from his boots and dropped a fresh armload of wood into the box, the noise making them all jump. He did not acknowledge the raw emotion in the room. He walked to the stove, poured himself a cup of coffee from the pot. It was mostly chicory now, thin and bitter, and drank it standing. His eyes swept the room. He saw Lydia's tear-streaked face, Annabelle's shame. His gaze lingered for a moment on Claire, who had resumed her polishing. He sensed the danger in them. It was more than just the men who might be tracking them. It was the danger they carried inside. He remembered the wreck, the moment he had found Claire. She had been leaning against the shattered coach wheel, her hands in her lap. They were covered in blood, not smeared, as if she had tried to help the driver. They were drenched, the blood drying black in the creases of her palms. He had assumed it was from the wreck, but her eyes, they had not been panicked. They had been empty, hollowed out, just like Lydia's were now. He thought of Rosa, too. The first night, he had watched her by the firelight, after she thought he had gone to the barn. She had pulled a silver locket from beneath her dress. She'd sprung it open, her thumb rubbing the two empty ovals inside. He had seen that gesture before, in the border states during the war. He didn't need to ask. She was a woman who had lost her children. He suspected she hadn't just lost them. She had watched them be taken, probably by fire or violence. Her desperate need to protect Lydia and Annabelle was the raw, aching instinct of a mother with no one left to mother. They were a collection of ghosts, and he was their unwilling keeper. That night, the storm worsened. The wind changed, coming down from the north with a high, mournful shriek that sounded like a woman screaming. Eli retreated to the barn, the cold silence of the hayloft his only refuge. He lay in his bedroll, the heavy buffalo hide pulled up to his chin, listening to the world try to tear itself apart. He must have drifted off because he was woken by a different sound, a human sound, sobbing. It was low, choked, and desperate. He sat up, his hand instantly finding his Colt. He listened. The sound was not coming from the cabin. It was closer. He swung out of the loft, landing silently on the packed earth of the barn floor. He moved to the door and peered out. Annabelle. She was huddled in the lean-to, sheltered by the woodpile, not wearing a coat. She was wrapped in her thin silk dress, her shoulders shaking violently, the sound of her crying ripped away by the wind. He watched her for a long moment. He could go back to the loft. It was not his business. He cursed, low and soft. He grabbed his heavy sheepskin coat from its peg and went out. The snow was a churning white wall. He crossed the few feet to the lean-to. "You'll freeze," he said. His voice was rough, and she startled, scrambling to her feet, her back hitting the logs. "Leave me be," she spat, wiping her face with a furious hand. "Go on, or is this what you were waiting for? The red-haired whore, crying in the snow. Is this the part where you offer comfort?" He stopped, a few feet from her. He didn't answer. He just held out the coat. His silence unnerved her. Her bravado cracked. "What do you want?" she whispered, her teeth chattering. "I want you to not die on my woodpile," he said. She stared at him, at the coat. She didn't take it. "They're coming," she choked out. "He's coming. The men on the road. They weren't just robbers. They were his." Eli waited. "My last client," she said, the word tasting like ash. He was a sheriff in Cheyenne, a big man, important, He liked things. He liked showing me who I belonged to. She told him how she had stolen from him. Not just money, but letters, documents that proved he was taking bribes from the railroad. She had run, thinking the stagecoach was anonymous enough, but he had sent men. The robbery was a pretense. They were looking for her, and for the papers. "They'll find me," she sobbed, sinking back down. "And when they do—" She looked up at him, her eyes stripped bare of all their fire. "No man can want a woman like me without using me. It's all I am, so just get it over with, or leave me here to freeze. It's all the same." Eli stood over her, the wind whipping his hair. He looked at this broken, defiant woman. He stepped forward and, instead of dropping the coat, he draped it over her shoulders, pulling the heavy shearling around her. He crouched in front of her. She flinched as he reached out, but he didn't touch her face or her body. He just touched her hand, his rough glove covering her small, frozen fingers. "Not all men," he said, his voice low, "are the ones who broke you." She stared at him, her breath catching. The simple, non-sexual kindness was something she had no defense against. In one desperate, ragged motion, she lunged at him. She grabbed the front of his shirt and kissed him. It was not a kiss of passion. It was a kiss of despair, of anger, of testing. It was chapped lips and the taste of salt and snow. She was trying to force the transaction, to prove herself right, to make him the animal she knew he was. Eli remained still. He did not kiss back, but he did not shove her away. He simply let her, his body rigid, his hands at his sides. She felt his stillness, his absolute lack of response, of aggression, and it broke her in a way violence never could. She tore herself away, scrambling back, her hand flying to her mouth. Shame flooded her face, hot and red. I'm sorry, I didn't—" He stood up. He looked down at her. "Get inside, Annabelle, before you die of the cold." He helped her to her feet, his grip firm on her arm. He walked her to the cabin door, which was barred from the inside. He pounded on it once, hard. Rosa opened it, her face pale with worry. She saw Annabelle, wrapped in Eli's coat, her face ravaged by tears. Annabelle stumbled inside, past Rosa, and collapsed onto a bedroll, baring her face. Rosa looked at Eli, a question in her eyes. He just shook his head and turned. Walking back to the barn, he did not sleep. Days bled into one another. The snow thickened, rising past the windowsill, until the cabin was a tomb of gray light. The world vanished. There was only the cabin, the barn, and the howling white. Food ran low. Eli butchered the pack mule. The women cried, but they ate the stringy, tough meat. The hunger, the cold, and the confinement worked on them, grinding down their edges. But something had changed. The women began to see Eli differently. Annabelle, though she would not meet his eye, watched him. She saw how he portioned the food, giving them the larger shares. Rosa saw how he checked the cabin roof every morning and night, clearing the snow load so they would not be crushed. Lydia saw how he spoke to the horse, his voice gentle in a way it never was with them. He had not taken advantage. He had been offered, and he had refused. He was not just a man, not just a threat. He was a kind of salvation. He was the wall that stood between them and the end of the world. The claustrophobic tension of survival began to braid with something else. Desire. It simmered in the close space, in the stolen glances, in the shared, miserable cold. It was the desperate, animal need for warmth, for life, for contact. The last secret fell on the 7th night. They were huddled around the stove, the last of the coffee boiling. Claire was rubbing her hands, trying to get warmth into them. A log in the stove popped, sending a hot ember through a crack in the grate. It landed on her wrist. She hissed, pulling her hand back, but not before Rosa saw the mark. "Let me see," Rosa said, grabbing her hand. Claire tried to pull away, her usual stillness broken by a flash of panic. "It's nothing? That's a burn," Rosa insisted. She pushed up the sleeve of Claire's dress, and they all saw them. Small, round scars, pale against her skin. Old ones, two perfectly round. "My husband," Claire said, her voice dead. "He liked his cigars, and he liked to teach me lessons when I was willful." She looked up, her eyes finding Eli's as he stood in the doorway. "He was a freighter, a big man. He came home, drunk, said I'd looked at his partner. He took off his belt. I'd seen the belt before." Her voice was flat, a monotone. "He kept going. He said he wouldn't stop until I begged. I didn't beg." She looked down at her hands. "I picked up the skinning knife. He didn't stop, so I made him." She was a wanted woman, a murderer. The blood Eli had seen on her hands at the wreck. It wasn't the driver's. It was her own, from where the knife had slipped. The stagecoach had been her escape. "You're wanted," Eli stated. It wasn't a question. "Yes," she said. He looked at her, at the quiet, deadly resolve. He nodded once, slowly. "You're not the only one who's killed to survive." He shut the door, leaving them with her confession. Later that night, the terror found its voice. Eli was in the loft, buried in the hay, suspended in the cold. Shallow sleep of a sentinel. A scream. It was Lydia, a raw shriek of animal terror that cut through the barn walls. He was on his feet, gun in hand. Before he was awake, he moved to the loft door, peering toward the cabin. The cabin door burst open. Lydia scrambled out, falling into the deep snow, wearing only her thin night shift. She was fighting, clawing at the air. "No!" she shrieked. "No! Father, please don't!" "I'm sorry, Reverend. Please, no!" "Lydia!" Rosa cried from the doorway. The girl was lost in a nightmare, reliving her trauma. She was going to freeze. Eli was already moving. He dropped from the loft, crossed the yard in 3 long strides, and scooped her up from the snow. She was light as a sparrow, and her skin was already icy. She fought him, her small fists beating weakly against his chest. "Put me down! Please, I'll be good! I'll be good!" He didn't take her back to the cabin, to the other women. He didn't know why. It was an instinct. He carried her to the barn, into his space, his sanctuary. He laid her in the hay, in his own bedroll. He grabbed the heavy buffalo hide and wrapped it around her, rubbing her arms and legs, trying to force the life back in. "You're safe," he said, his voice low. "You're here. It was a dream." She went still. Her eyes opened, wide and dark in the gloom of the barn. She saw his face, weathered and harsh, but she saw the man who had brought her in from the cold. She was shivering violently, a deep, bone-rattling cold. She looked at him. She didn't speak. She just lifted the edge of the heavy buffalo hide. It was not a question. It was a desperate, silent plea. He hesitated. The air in the barn was deadly cold. She would not last. He lay down on the hay, on top of the first blanket, and pulled the heavy hide over both of them. She immediately turned, pressing herself against his side, burrowing against his warmth like a half-frozen animal. They lay in silence. Eli was rigid, every muscle tensed. He could feel the entire length of her body, thin and trembling. Through her shift and his long johns, he could feel the frantic beat of her heart against his ribs. He smelled the faint, clean scent of her skin, overshadowed by the sharp tang of fear. His body, long dormant, answered. A deep, slow, agonizing ache. The heat in the bedroll became immediate, unbearable. He was a man who had been alone for 5 years, and she was soft and warm and terrified. He did not move. He forced his hands to stay at his sides. He made himself breathe, slow and steady. Her shivering gradually subsided. Her breathing deepened. The terror bled away, replaced by the simple, heavy exhaustion of sleep. Eli Ward lay awake until the first gray light of dawn, his arm trapped beneath her, the unbearable heat of her body pressed against his. Nothing had happened, but the want, the pure, raw want, was almost worse than if it had. Eli woke before the light, the memory of Lydia's warmth a brand against his side. He had left her in the hay, asleep and safe, and returned to the cabin to stoke the fire, his mind a quiet, churning sea of confusion. He felt the pull toward her, a sharp, protective ache he had not felt in years, but it was tangled with the old, Familiar warning. Attachment was a liability. It was a weakness. He spent the morning in the barn, reinforcing a section of the paddock fence. His movements mechanical. He was coiling rope when he heard Stonewall. In his stall. Give a low, wary nicker. Eli went still. He listened past the silence of the snow. Nothing. Then, a sound. The crunch of hooves on frozen crust. Slow and steady. It was not a deer. He moved to the barn's small, grimed window. A lone rider, a black dot moving against the vast white of the valley floor. Still a mile out, but coming straight for the ranch. Eli was in the cabin in an instant. The women looked up, startled by his sudden entrance. "There's a rider," he said. His voice was flat, cold. "Root cellar, now." "Who?" Annabelle asked, her face draining of color. "Don't know. Don't care. Move!" He pulled back the bearskin rug near the hearth, revealing the heavy plank door set into the floor. He lifted it. A wave of cold, earthy air rose from the blackness. "Get in!" he commanded. Rosa herded them. Lydia, Annabelle. "Go!" Lydia scrambled down the short ladder, disappearing into the dark. Annabelle hesitated, her eyes wide with terror, before following Claire. Still, her face a mask, climbed down without a word. Rosa looked back at Eli. "What will you do?" "Just get in. Rosa." She descended. Eli handed her a heavy buffalo hide. "Stay at the bottom of the ladder. Do not make a sound. I don't care what you hear. Do not come out until I open this door myself." He shut the door, dropped the heavy rug over it, and kicked a stool near it to hide the seams. He threw a fresh log on the fire, grabbed his coat, and went outside, his face set in the mask of the reclusive rancher. He was mending the paddock fence, his back to the rider, when the horse stopped. "That's far enough," Eli said, not turning around. "Mr. Ward? Eli Ward?" The voice was strained with cold. Eli turned slowly. The man was bundled in a heavy canvas coat, his face red with frostbite. A bent tin star pinned to his chest. A deputy. He sat his horse, a tired-looking bay, his hand resting on the rifle in his scabbard. "That's my name," Eli said. "Deputy Croft. From Helena. I'm tracking a wrecked stagecoach, high flyer, supposed to have passed through the high pass about 10 days back." "I've heard the storm," Eli said, his gaze flat. "Haven't left this valley in 2 weeks. Been too busy keeping my stock from freezing." Croft's eyes, small and sharp, scanned the ranch, the smoking chimney, the solid barn, the emptiness. "You see nothing? No sign of wreckage? No travelers?" "No one comes through here," Eli said. "Not in winter." The deputy spat, a brown stream that froze instantly on the snow. "Damn. We found the coach. What was left of it? Driver and guard shot. Robbed." Eli nodded, his face impassive. "Bandits." "Maybe," Croft said, his eyes narrowing. "But we're not tracking bandits. We're tracking 4 women, passengers. They vanished from the wreck." "4 women?" Eli let a small, harsh laugh escape. "In this, they're dead. Deputy. If they survived the robbers, the storm took them." "Maybe," Croft said again. "But the tracks were strange. And there's word from Cheyenne. We think these women weren't victims. We think they're criminals. 2 whores, 2 murderers. Stole a pile of money before they ran." He leaned forward. "There's a reward. Ward, $500. For any information. $500. Enough to buy a man's silence, or his betrayal." Eli just shook his head. "I told you, I've seen no one." Croft looked at the cabin. "You live here alone?" "Always have." The deputy sat there, the wind whipping his horse's mane. He was cold, and he was suspicious. He looked at the cabin, then at the barn, then back at Eli. He saw nothing but a hard, solitary man on a hard, solitary ranch. "Well," Croft said, pulling his collar tight, "if you do see anything at all, you ride to Helena. $500 is a lot of money for a man living alone." "If I see anything," Eli said. Turning back to his fence, he did not watch the deputy leave. He listened to the slow, crunching retreat of the horse, the sound fading into the vast, snowy silence. He waited. He waited an hour, the cold seeping into his bones, until he was sure the man was gone from the valley. Then he went inside and opened the cellar door. They emerged like ghosts, pale and trembling with cold and fear. Annabelle was shaking, her eyes darting to the door. "Who was it?" she demanded. "A deputy," Eli said, throwing the rug back over the door. "From Helena." "What did he want?" Lydia whispered. "He was tracking the wreck. He was tracking you." The silence was heavy. Claire spoke, her voice low. "What did you tell him?" Eli looked at her. "I told him I'd been alone for 2 weeks. I told him if 4 women were out in this storm, they were dead." The weight of the lie settled in the room. He had not just sheltered them. He had actively lied to the law for them. He had crossed a line. He was their accomplice now. Annabelle began to pace, her hands clenched. "He'll come back. I know he will. They're hunting me. We have to go." "Go where?" Lydia asked, her voice trembling. "We saw the snow. It's over our heads. Anywhere," Annabelle insisted. "It's better than a rope. He called us criminals, murderers. He's coming back for us." "She's right," Claire said, her voice flat. "He didn't believe you." A frantic, useless panic began to build. They were trapped. "Enough," Rosa said, her voice, quiet but absolute, cut through the fear. She stood by the fire, her back straight. "Annabelle, stop! Look out that window! Look!" She pointed to the high, blinding drifts. "Go where? There is nowhere. The passes are 10 feet deep in snow. We have no food. We have no horses fit for that ride. If we go out there," she said, her voice dropping, "we die. Of cold. Or starvation. Or we are tracked and taken." She paused, letting the harsh truth settle. "In here," she said, her gaze turning to Eli, who watched from the shadows. "In here. We have a chance." The debate was over. It was not a choice. It was a fact. They were trapped, and their survival was now bound completely to the man who had lied for them. The deputy's visit, and Eli's lie, changed the air in the cabin. The wall between him and them had been breached. He was no longer just a host. He was their protector. The storm broke. For the first time in nearly 2 weeks, the sun appeared, a fierce, blinding light that made the endless white expanse glitter. The world was beautiful, and it was a prison. A fragile routine began. They could not hide in the cabin forever, not with the snow load threatening the roof. Eli put them to work. He taught Lydia how to feed Stonewall and the last of the cattle, and her gentle, quiet nature seemed to soothe the animals. Annabelle, surprisingly, took charge of the cabin. She had a fierce, defiant energy, and she scrubbed the floor, mended their torn clothes, and found a way to make the stringy mule meat into a passable stew. She worked as if she could scour away her past. Claire, the silent one, was the strongest. She helped Eli clear the heavy, packed snow from the cabin roof, working beside him for hours, matching his steady, tireless pace. She rarely spoke, but she worked with a grim determination. At night, the fear was still there, but it was thinner. They gathered by the fire, and the shared work gave way to shared stories. Rosa spoke of her childhood in Mexico, of a valley where it was never cold, describing the taste of peppers she had grown. Lydia, her voice gaining a hesitant strength, talked about a book she had once read, a story of knights and ladies, her face lit by the firelight. One night, Annabelle told a funny, sharp-witted story about a rich woman in Cheyenne who had worn a dreadful hat, and Lydia let out a small, surprising peal of laughter. The sound was shocking in the quiet cabin, and then Annabelle laughed too, a rusty, unused sound. Eli sat apart, cleaning his rifle, watching them. He was, he realized, no longer alone. He found his gaze lingering on Lydia. The night in the barn was a secret between them, a line of heat and fear. He saw her courage, the way she forced herself to do the chores, the way she fought back the terror that still haunted her. He felt a deep, unfamiliar urge to shelter her, to keep the world from breaking her any further, but then his eyes would shift. They would find Claire. She sat by the fire, her hands never still, making or sharpening a knife. She was like him. She was quiet, and she understood violence. When she looked up, her dark eyes would meet his across the room. It was not a look of softness. It was a look of recognition, a shared, stolen glance between two people who knew what it was to survive. He was caught between Lydia's vulnerability, which he wanted to protect, and Claire's strength, which he understood. The fragile peace held for 3 more days. The snow began to crust, hard enough to walk on in the mornings. It was late. Lydia and Annabelle were asleep in their bedrolls. Claire was on the cot, her back to the room. Eli was banking the fire, preparing to head to the barn. Rosa sat in the low rocker, mending one of his shirts by the dim light of the embers. The cabin was quiet, filled with the sound of their breathing. "You are a good man. Eli Ward," Rosa said, her voice so soft it was almost part of the silence. Eli paused, his hand on the poker. "I'm a man who's tired of snow." She did not look up from her sewing. "My husband, the one I had before, he was not a kind man. Even before the raiders came and took my children, he was not kind." Eli turned, watching her. Her hands were steady on the needle. "It has been over 10 years, she said, her voice flat, matter of fact. "Since I was touched by anyone. Not in anger, not in a way that left a bruise." She set the sewing aside and looked up at him. Her face was worn, mapped with grief, but her eyes were clear. "When you look at me, Eli," she whispered, her voice raw, "do you just see an old woman? Do you see someone who is old and broken?" The question hung in the warm, dark air. It was a plea, not for passion, but for acknowledgement, a plea to be seen as human. Eli looked at her for a long time. He saw the woman who had held the others together. He saw the strength that had endured what would have shattered most. He crossed the room and knelt in front of her chair. He reached out, his calloused, weather-cracked hand, and gently touched her cheek. Her skin was soft. He did not say she was beautiful. He said what was true. "I don't see broken," he said, his voice low and rough. "I see you as someone who's still alive, and that's the hardest thing to be." She closed her eyes, leaning into his palm, her own hand coming up to cover his, pressing it to her face. A single tear escaped and ran over his thumb. That night, he did not go to the barn. When the fire was nothing but red embers, he lay down on the cot beside her. Their intimacy was a quiet, solemn thing. It was respectful. It was 2 survivors in the dark, seeking warmth. It was clumsy and hesitant and profoundly human. It was a reclaiming. Afterward, in the deep silence, she began to cry, not the loud sobs of grief, but a silent, shuddering release, her shoulders shaking. He held her, his arm draped over her. "Did I hurt you, Rosa?" he whispered. She turned, burying her face in his chest. "No," she choked out. "No, it was the first time in so long that it didn't." In the morning, the other women knew. In a one-room cabin, there are no secrets of the body. When Eli rose before dawn and left for the barn, he felt their eyes on him, but he did not look at them. When the cabin grew light, Annabelle looked at Rosa, who was already up, her face pale and tired, but a deep, settled calm in her eyes. Lydia looked confused, a flicker of something unreadable in her gaze, but she said nothing. Annabelle, who had known the worst of men, looked at Rosa, and then she looked at the empty cot. She nodded once, a slow gesture of understanding. There was no anger, there was no jealousy. They were too far beyond such things. It had not been an act of betrayal. It had been an act of kindness. The fragile balance held, but it was built on shared secrets, and it was brittle. It broke 2 days later. Eli had taken his rifle and gone out, checking the snares he had set, still wary of the deputy's return. The women were in the cabin. Annabelle was sorting the last of their dried beans when she noticed Claire. The quiet woman was not mending. She was standing by Eli's small, crude shelf, the one where he kept his razor. his discharge papers, and a small, locked wooden box. Claire was working at the lock with a piece of wire. "What are you doing?" Annabelle's voice was sharp. Claire froze. She had the box open. Annabelle moved closer and looked inside. It was not money. It was a box of bullets. 44s. For his Colt. "You're stealing from him?" Annabelle was appalled. "After he lied for us?" "I'm not stealing," Claire said, her voice a low, fierce hiss. She grabbed the box. "I'm preparing." "Preparing for what?" "He's coming back," Claire said, her eyes dark. "That deputy, or your sheriff, or my husband's family. Trouble is coming. Annabelle, I can feel it in my bones. He hides us in the cellar. I won't hide again. Not ever." "And you'll do what? Shoot them?" "If I have to," Claire said. "If it means protecting us, I will." "Help with what?" The voice came from the doorway. Eli stood there, silent as a shadow, his rifle in his hand. Both women froze. Annabelle stepped back. Claire turned. The open box of bullets clutched in her hand. Her composure, the wall of silence she had worn since the wreck, finally cracked. She looked at the bullets, then at Eli, and she broke. It was not a slow confession. It was a collapse. "I had to," she sobbed, sinking to her knees, the bullets spilling onto the floor. "I can't go back. He'll find me. His family. They're rich. They'll find me." She told him everything. Not the flat, dead story from before, but the ragged, tearing truth, the years of it, the cigars, the belt, the night he came home, laughing, telling her he'd kill her if she ever looked at another man. "I just wanted him to stop," she cried, her voice muffled in her hands. "He wouldn't stop. He kept hitting me. I picked up the knife. I just wanted him to stop." Eli stood over her. He saw the murderer the deputy was hunting. He saw the truth, raw and bleeding on his cabin floor. And for a single, cold moment, he considered it. He could turn her in. He could ride to Helena, tell the deputy he'd found one of them, the murderer. He could trade Claire for the safety of the others. For Lydia. For his own peace. It would be simple. $500. He looked at her, a broken woman sobbing on his floor, surrounded by his bullets, something inside him, the part of him that was a scout, the part that was a survivor, rebelled. He saw not a criminal, but a soldier. He bent down, his knees cracking, and began picking up the scattered cartridges. He took the box from her trembling hands and put the last of the bullets inside. He closed the lid. He looked at her, his face hard, but his eyes were not unkind. "You're not the only one," he said, his voice rough. "Who's killed to survive?" The thaw came not as a gentle promise, but as a threat. The world, which had been sealed shut by the blizzard, began to open. The snow, which had been their white fortress, turned to slush and mud. The high passes were becoming passable. The silence was broken by the sound of water dripping from the eaves, a sound like a clock ticking. Eli Ward knew what it meant. The valley was no longer safe. The outside world, with its deputies and its bounty, could get in, and they were out of everything. The last of the mule meat was gone. The coffee was a memory. They were down to half a sack of flour and the potatoes in the cellar. He stood by the cabin door, pulling on his heavy coat. He had his rifle in one hand and his saddlebags, empty, in the other. "Stonewall is fast," he said, not looking at them. "I can make Helena and be back in 3 days, maybe 4. The 4 women watched him. Rosa, her face etched with a new worry. Annabelle, her arms crossed, biting her lip. Claire, still, her eyes fixed on the rifle. And Lydia, who stood closest to the door, her hands twisting in her apron. "You're leaving us," Lydia whispered. It was not an accusation, just a statement of terror. "I'm getting supplies," he said gruffly. "Salt, flour, coffee, and cartridges. We're low." He looked at Claire when he said it. She met his gaze, unflinching. "While I'm gone," he said, his voice hard, "you stay out of sight. You hear a horse, you hear a man. You don't ask questions. You go to the root cellar. You lock it from the inside. You don't come out, not for any reason, not even if you think it's me. I will come in. I will knock 3 times, then 2, then 1. If you don't hear that, you stay buried. Do you understand?" Rosa nodded. "We understand. Eli?" He turned to go. "Wait," Lydia said. She stepped forward and pressed something into his hand. It was a small, carved wooden bird, worn smooth. "My brother made it," she said. "For luck." He looked at the small, simple thing in his calloused palm. He felt its warmth. He closed his fist around it and slid it into his pocket, his face unreadable. "The cellar," he said again. Then he was gone, his boots sucking at the mud, heading for the barn. They watched from the window as he rode Stonewall out of the valley, a single, dark figure moving against the gray, wet landscape. The ride to Helena was a long misery of mud and half-frozen creeks. The town, when he reached it, was a shock to his system. After weeks of silence, the noise of wagons, shouting, and saloon pianos felt like an assault. The streets were channels of thick, ankle-deep mud. He tied Stonewall in front of the general store, his eyes scanning every face. He felt exposed, his senses screaming after the long isolation. He kept his hat low. Inside, the store was warm, smelling of kerosene, tobacco, and damp wool. He gave his list to the clerk. Flour, salt, coffee, a side of bacon, and 2 boxes of 44s. As he waited, he drifted toward the pot-bellied stove, where 2 men, prospectors by the look of them, were drinking coffee and talking. "Heard it from Croft himself," one of them said, spitting a stream of tobacco into a cuspidor. "That Cheyenne sheriff, the one Annabelle girl stole from. He's ridden all the way up, mad as a hornet." Eli's back went rigid. He did not turn. $500, the other man whistled. "That's a pile of coin, just for finding them." "It ain't just finding," the first man said. "It's for them, dead or alive. They say one of them, the quiet one, killed her husband back in Colorado. Gutted him. The sheriff wants Annabelle, and the law wants the other one. They're calling them a gang of murdering doxies. 4 of them. Imagine that. Wonder where they got to. Croft figured the storm took 'em, maybe, or maybe they holed up. $500 would make a man check every lone cabin and hollow log from here to the border." The clerk called his name. "Mr. Ward, your order's filled." Eli paid, his movements calm, measured. He paid in coin, his face a mask. "That's a lot of cartridges, Mr. Ward," the clerk noted, bagging the boxes. "Spring thaw," Eli said, his voice flat. "Bears are waking up hungry." He left the store, loaded his supplies onto Stonewall. He looked at the saloon, at the sheriff's office. He felt the eyes of the town on him. He felt the greed. He had told the women 3 days, maybe 4. He lied to the stableman, saying he was heading south to check a trap line. He mounted Stonewall and rode north, out of town. Once he was clear of the main road, he cut west, into the high country. He would not sleep. He would not rest. He pushed Stonewall through the mud and melting snow, his mind cold and clear. He had lied to the women. He had known he would be back in 2. He rode the horse into the ground, stopping only to let him drink from the swollen creeks. He bypassed the main pass, taking a goat trail he knew from his scouting days, a dangerous, winding path that cut 5 hours off the ride. He reached the ridge above his valley just as the sun was setting on the 2nd day, and he stopped. He smelled it on the wind. It was faint, but unmistakable. Cigar smoke. He dismounted, his movements swift and silent. He tied Stonewall in a dense thicket of aspen. Grabbing his rifle and the new box of cartridges, he did not ride into the valley. He moved down the canyon wall on foot, a shadow moving through the pines, his eyes scanning the ranch below. 3 horses. They were tied to his paddock fence. They were not cavalry mounts. They were lathered, hard-ridden, and they carried no brands he recognized. And there were 3 men. They had not come from Helena. They had come from the east. One man, heavy-set with a derby hat, was on the porch, smoking the cigar Eli had smelled. 2 others were circling the barn, their coats unbuttoned, their sidearms visible. They were not lawmen. They were hard cases. Eli felt a cold, sinking dread. He had told the women the cellar, but the chimney was cold. The cabin was dark. He watched as one of the men at the barn kicked the door. "Empty," the man called. The leader on the porch swore. "They're here. I can smell 'em. That lawman said this was the only ranch in the valley. They're hiding. Check the loft." The dread turned to ice. They were in the barn. They must have been watching for him, seen the strangers coming, and hidden in the hayloft instead of the cellar. A fatal mistake. Eli stepped out from the trees, his rifle held low, across his chest. "You've looked long enough," he said. His voice was calm, carrying in the twilight. The 3 men froze. They spun, hands dropping to their guns. The leader on the porch turned, his eyes narrowing. He had a cold face, a thick mustache. "Well, look at this. The man of the house. This your property? Friend?" "It is," Eli said, walking slowly forward, his feet steady on the mud. "And you're trespassing." "We're agents," the man said. "Pinkerton. We're tracking fugitives." "You're not Pinkertons," Eli said. He stopped, a good 50 yards away. A clear shot. "Pinkertons don't ride horses like that, and they don't look like bounty men from Cheyenne." The leader's eyes widened. Just a fraction. He had not expected that. "So," the leader said, his voice turning smooth, dangerous. "You're not just a rancher. You're a smart one." He took a step off the porch. "That makes you an accomplice. We're looking for 4 women. One of them, Annabelle, stole property from Sheriff Harris. The others are wanted. We know they're here." "There's no one here but me," Eli said. "Has been for 5 years. You've had your look. Now get—" "I don't think so," the leader sneered. He nodded to his men. "Check the loft. Kill anyone you find who ain't him." The 2 men started for the barn. "I wouldn't," Eli said, his voice still quiet, but the rifle came up, settling against his shoulder. The leader laughed. "You're 1 man. We're 3. You're not fast enough to stop all of us." He reached inside his coat. It happened in a heartbeat. The leader drew. Eli squeezed his trigger, but before his rifle could roar, a different sound split the air. A sharp crack from the barn loft. A pistol shot. The leader screamed. A high, strangled sound. As he was spun around, he grabbed his shoulder, his gun flying from his hand and clattering onto the porch. Blood gushed between his fingers. "Claire!" All hell broke loose. The other 2 men dove for cover, drawing and firing as they moved. One scrambled behind the water trough, the other behind Eli's woodpile. Bullets ripped through the air, thwacking into the trees around Eli, whining off the barn's hinges. Eli dove, rolling behind the solid corner of the paddock fence as splinters exploded where he had been standing. "They're in the barn," the man at the trough yelled, firing 2 quick shots into the loft doors. A scream came from inside. Lydia, rage, cold and pure, surged in Eli. He rose, aimed, and fired. The man at the woodpile yelped as the heavy slug tore through the log, showering him with bark. Another pistol shot from the loft. Claire, again. She was firing slow, deliberate. She wasn't panicking. The man at the trough was pinned. He was firing at the loft, and Eli was firing at him. "It ain't worth this." "Pike," the man at the woodpile yelled, holding his arm. "She shot the boss." The leader, Pike, was on the porch, trying to stop the bleeding, his face pale and twisted. "Kill them," he shrieked. "Kill them all." But the man at the woodpile had had enough. He broke cover, running for his horse. Eli tracked him with his rifle but didn't fire. He let him go. The man at the trough saw his chance. He fired one last blind shot at the barn, then sprinted for his own horse. Pike, cursing, staggered to his feet. He clutched his bleeding shoulder, grabbed his horse's reins, and hauled himself into the saddle. "This ain't over, rancher," he screamed, his voice thick with pain. "You're harboring murderers. We'll be back. We'll be back with the sheriff." He dug his heels into the horse, and the three of them galloped out of the valley. A panicked, bleeding retreat. The silence that fell was absolute, broken only by the ringing in Eli's ears and the high, thin sound of someone sobbing in the barn. He stood up, his rifle smoking, his heart hammering against his ribs. He ejected the spent cartridge and slid a new one into the chamber. The barn door opened. Rosa emerged first, her face ashen. Annabelle followed, her eyes wide with a mixture of terror and fury. Lydia came last, half carried by Claire, sobbing uncontrollably. Claire. She stood on the barn ramp, Eli's heavy Colt pistol held in her hand, the barrel still smoking. Eli stalked toward them. He was shaking, not with fear, but with a visceral rage. The quiet he had built for 5 years had been shattered by gunfire. He strode up to Claire and snatched the pistol from her hand. "What the hell were you thinking?" he snarled. His voice was a low roar that echoed in the quiet valley. I told you the cellar! Why were you in the barn?" "We were watching for you," Annabelle said, her voice shaky. "We saw them coming. We didn't have time for the cellar. You were supposed to hide," he yelled. He rounded on all of them, his face dark with fury. This is what you bring. This is my home. You brought guns and death and bounty hunters to my home." He pointed to the dark, wet stain on his porch. "You shot a man. You made me an accomplice. You made me an outlaw." His words struck them like stones. Rosa flinched. Annabelle looked away, her face burning with shame. Claire just stared at the ground, her hands clenched at her sides. Lydia, however, pulled away from Claire. She was shaking, her face a mess of tears and dirt. But she stepped toward Eli. "We didn't ask for this," she cried, her voice tearing. "We didn't ask to be hurt," she sobbed, her small fists clenched. "We didn't ask to be broken by preachers, or husbands, or sheriffs. We didn't ask to be hunted." She was shouting now, her entire body trembling with the force of her grief. "We just wanted somewhere to not be afraid," she screamed at him. "Just for one night. That's all we ever wanted. We just wanted to not be afraid." Her cry hung in the cold, twilight air. It broke through his rage. It shattered it, leaving him looking at the four of them, 4 women who had just been in a gunfight, one of whom had saved his life, all of whom were shaking in terror. He looked at Lydia, her face ravaged by a pain he couldn't fix. He looked at the blood on his porch. He looked at the bullet holes in his barn. He couldn't breathe. The weight of it, their fear, their danger, his lie to the deputy, the blood. It was too much. Without a word, he turned. He dropped the pistol into his coat pocket, shouldered his rifle, and walked away. He didn't go to the barn. He walked past the cabin, past the paddock, and started up the dark canyon trail, his back to them. "Eli," Rosa called out, her voice desperate. He didn't stop. He just kept walking, his figure shrinking in the gloom, until the shadows of the canyon swallowed him whole. The women stood alone, in the cold, listening to him go. The sun set. The valley went dark. He was gone. He had abandoned them. They retreated into the cabin, but they did not light a lamp. They sat in the cold, dark room, the silence a heavy blanket. The smell of gunpowder and cigar smoke lingered in the air. Hours passed. 1, 2. Rosa finally stirred, her limbs stiff. "We must build the fire," she whispered. "We will freeze." As she reached for the matches, a sound from outside made them all gasp. Sawing, they scrambled to the window, peering out into the moonlit yard. He was back. Eli stood by the cabin, his toolbox open at his feet. He had planks of heavy oak, boards Eli must have been saving for years, stacked by the door. In the pale moonlight, he was measuring the front window frame. The women stumbled outside, pulling their shawls tight. He didn't look up, his face hidden in shadow. He just kept working, the saw biting into the wood with a steady, rhythmic sound. "Eli?" Rosa's voice was hesitant. He stopped sawing. He looked up, his face grim, exhausted, but set with a new, hard resolve. "He'll be back," Eli said, his voice flat. "Pike, the one Claire shot, he'll be back. or he'll send the sheriff, or both." He hefted a heavy plank, testing its weight. "They know you're here. They know I'm with you." He looked at the bullet-scarred door. "This time, they'll find us ready." He turned back to his work, placing the plank against the window. "We finish what we started." That night, they worked. There was no sleep. By the light of 2 lanterns, they turned the cabin into a fortress. He showed them how to brace the doors with new, thick bars. He sawed planks to create heavy, removable shutters for the windows, with small, carved slits to shoot through. They worked as one. Rosa held the lantern, her hand steady. Annabelle, her anger gone, replaced by a grim purpose. Sorted nails. Lydia, her tears dry, handed him the hammer, the saw, her movements quick and certain, and Claire, silent as ever, worked beside him, holding the heavy planks in place, her strength surprising him. They were no longer 4 victims and a rescuer. They were a garrison. When the first gray light of dawn touched the valley, they were done. The cabin was reinforced. The tools were put away. They collapsed around the hearth, the fire roaring. They were covered in sawdust, their hands raw, their bodies aching. They sat in the warm glow, too tired to move to their bedrolls. Rosa was already asleep in her chair. Eli sat on the floor, his back against the wall, staring into the flames. Annabelle, Lydia, and Claire were sitting near him. The gunfire, the shared terror, and the night of hard labor had burned away the last of their jealousies. There was only a shared, exhausted closeness. "I've been alone a long time," Eli said, his voice low, rough. It startled them, this sudden confession. "Since the war, I came out here because I was tired of the world, tired of pretending to be a part of things I didn't understand, tired of pretending." He looked at them, his gaze moving from Annabelle to Claire to Lydia. "I'm tired of pretending to be alone." The words settled in the quiet room. Lydia, who had screamed her pain at him, now showed him her hope. She moved from her spot, kneeling in front of him. Her hand found his, her small fingers lacing with his. She leaned in and kissed him. It was not a test, like Annabelle's. It was not the quiet gratitude of Rosa. It was a long, aching, needy kiss. It was a kiss of desperation, of hope, of a survivor claiming her first stake in a new, terrifying life. It was a kiss that said, "I am here. Please, be here with me." As she kissed him, Annabelle, the woman who had believed all touch was a transaction, reached out from her spot. She took his other hand, her grip surprisingly strong. She held it, her head bowed, a silent, fierce pledge. And Claire, the woman who had saved his life, the woman who had killed to survive, moved to his side. She did not kiss him. She did not take his hand. She reached out, her fingers hesitant, and gently touched his face. Her hand was rough, like his, but her touch was light. She traced the line of his jaw, her eyes meeting his in a gesture of profound, silent understanding. He was surrounded. He was held. By their pain, by their strength, by their courage, by their need. That night, in the small, fortified cabin, with the threat of the world held at bay by new oak planks, passion finally overtook all pretense. It was not chaos. It was not a sin. It was the deep, shuddering, emotional release of 5 people who had been alone for too long. It was bodies and memories, wounds and healing, all tangled together in the warm glow of the fire. It was 5 lost souls, finding not just shelter, but salvation. In the most dangerous place of all, each other. The morning brought consequences. Dawn in the fortified cabin was a heavy, subdued thing. The intimacy of the night, the tangled, desperate comfort they had shared by the firelight, had not erased the danger. It had only raised the stakes. Eli was already dressed, standing at the new, narrow slit in the oak shutter, his rifle in his hand. He had not slept. The cabin, which had once been his cold, empty sanctuary, was now warm, smelling of wood smoke, sleep, and the complex, human scent of the 4 women, his women. He felt the word in his mind, a heavy, protective weight. Lydia woke first, her hand brushing the empty bedroll beside her. She saw him, a dark silhouette against the gray light, and a new, different kind of fear settled in her. Not the fear of him, but the fear of losing him, of losing this fragile, impossible home. One by one, they stirred. Annabelle, her red hair wild, pulled a blanket around her shoulders. Rosa, her face weary but calm, began to quietly stoke the fire. Claire sat up, her back straight, her hands already checking the pistol Eli had left with her. The night had changed everything. There was no more jealousy, no more suspicion. They were a single, breathing thing. A family forged in gunfire. "He's out there," Claire said, her voice low. "Pike, the one I shot." Eli nodded, his eyes never leaving the valley. "He is, or he's gone to Helena to get the sheriff. They'll be back. They won't leave us be. So we wait," Annabelle said, her voice hard. She stood, pacing the small space. "We just wait here, trapped, until they come back with 10 men and burn us down." "We cannot run, Annabelle," Rosa said, her voice heavy. "We have been over this. The passes are mud. We would not get a mile." "I am not running," Annabelle said, her voice fierce. She stopped pacing and looked at them, her eyes burning. "I am tired of running. I ran from Cheyenne. I ran from those men. I will not run from this cabin." "Then what?" Lydia whispered. "We fight until we die?" "No," Annabelle said, her jaw set. "We face them. We tell the truth." "The truth?" Rosa said, skeptical. "That we are victims. That Pike attacked us. That we were defending ourselves." Eli finally turned from the window. His face was grim, exhausted. "The truth won't matter to that deputy. Croft. He already called you criminals." "And Harris, your sheriff from Cheyenne. He's in Helena. He's twisting the story. To them, we are the outlaws." "Then we have nothing," Lydia said, her hope crumbling. "No," Eli said. He looked at Annabelle. "You have the letters. The ones you stole from Harris." Annabelle's hand went to the hem of her dress. I still have them. Sewn into the lining. I never let them go." "I heard them in town," Eli said. "Harris is there. He's pushing the local law, a Sheriff Silas. That's who we have to convince." He began to pace, his mind working. "We can't wait for them to come here. I have to go back. I have to go to Silas." The women stared at him. "Go back," Rosa said, her voice tight with fear. "They'll arrest you. Eli, they'll hang you for helping us." "It's a risk I have to take," he said. "Or," Lydia said, her voice small and terrible, "you will trade us. You will go to them and make a deal. You'll give them Claire for the murder. You'll give them Annabelle for the theft. You'll take the bounty money and save yourself." The accusation, the raw fear of betrayal, hung in the air. It was the last, deepest wound they carried. Eli looked at her. He saw the terror in her eyes, the expectation of abandonment. He walked to her, stopping just inches from her. He did not touch her. "I lied for you," he said, his voice low and rough. "I took bullets for you. I shared my fire with you. I will not betray you." He looked at Annabelle. "Give me the letters." Annabelle hesitated, her hand on her dress. "I swear to you," Eli said, his gaze sweeping over all 4 of them. "I will protect you. No matter what." With a ripping sound, Annabelle tore the oilskin packet from her hem. She placed it in his hand. "They're real. He'll know they are." Eli nodded, sliding the packet deep into his coat. "Get the shutters in place. Bar the door. Do not open it for anyone, not even me, not until you hear the signal. 3 knocks, then 2, then 1. He chambered around in his rifle. "I'll be back by nightfall, or I won't be back at all." Helena was a different town than the one he had left. The mud seemed thicker, the faces harder. He tied Stonewall loosely, his rifle in his hand. He walked into the sheriff's office, his spurs quiet on the wooden floor. It was busy. Deputy Croft was there, as was the big, red-faced man Eli knew must be Sheriff Harris. And at the main desk sat an older, weary-looking man with a tin star. "Sheriff Silas." "That's him," Croft said, his hand dropping to his gun. "That's the rancher, Ward." "Hold on, deputy," Silas said. His eyes, the color of gunmetal, appraised Eli. "You're a hard man to find, Ward, and you've got a lot of nerve walking in here." "I'm not here to fight," Eli said. "I'm here to report an attack on my property. 3 men, led by one named Pike. They tried to kill me, and they tried to burn my barn." Harris let out a sharp, ugly laugh. "Pike works for me." "You lying son of a... He was tracking stolen property. My property." "Those 4 women you're hiding..." "I'm harboring 4 survivors," Eli said, his voice level, directed only at Silas. "They were on the high flyer. It was robbed. They were left for dead. Pike's men weren't law. They were bounty hunters. They shot first." "A good story," Silas said, steepling his fingers. "But Croft here tells me he offered you $500 a head for them. You said you'd seen no one. Now you're here, admitting they're at your ranch. That makes you a liar. And an accomplice." "They're victims," Eli insisted. "Victims?" Silas scoffed, his voice turning cold. "It doesn't matter what they were. Ward, one is wanted for the murder of her husband in Colorado. The redhead is wanted for felony theft in Wyoming. They are wanted now, and you are obstructing justice." Eli saw the trap closing. Silas was not an honest man. He was a practical one. "So what's the price?" Eli asked. "Price? To make this go away. Is it the $2,000 bounty? Is that what you want?" Harris smirked. Silas just watched him. "You don't have $2,000. Rancher?" "No," Eli said. "But I have this." He tossed the oilskin packet onto the desk. Silas didn't move. Harris's eyes widened. "What is that?" "Open it," Eli said. Silas untied the string. He pulled out the letters. He began to read. His face, weary before, went still. He read the letter from the Union Pacific agent, the one promising 10% of the land grants. He read the one about the land office fire. Harris went pale, then a deep, apoplectic purple. "Those are forgeries, lies." "Are they?" Eli said. "There are 6 more in there. All real, all signed. Annabelle didn't just take your money. Harris, she took your whole life." Eli looked at Silas. "So here's the deal. You arrest Harris. He's a corrupt lawman taking railroad bribes. You'll be a hero. The letters are yours. In exchange, you grant full pardons to the 4 women. You clear their names. You declare them victims of the stage robbery, and you call off your men." Silence filled the office. Croft looked from Silas to Harris, his hand on his gun. Unsure, Silas looked at the letters. He looked at Harris, who was sweating. Then he looked at Eli. Slowly, he pushed the letters back across the desk. "These are impressive forgeries." "Ward," Silas said, his voice flat. Eli's blood went cold. "But they're just paper," Silas continued. "Sheriff Harris is a respected officer of the law from a neighboring territory. You are a reclusive rancher who, by your own admission, is harboring a murderer and a thief." Harris let out a shaky breath, a smirk spreading across his face. "You're making a mistake, Silas," Eli said, his voice low. "I don't think so." Silas said, "Harris has the railroad. He has influence. You have 4 whores and a pile of dirt. Deputy Croft, arrest this man." Croft drew his gun. "On your knees, Ward." Eli had known this was a risk. He had seen the choice in Silas's eyes. He didn't move. He looked at Croft, at Harris. "I'm not going to jail." He acted in one violent, desperate motion. He kicked the heavy desk. It slammed into Silas, pinning him to the wall. Eli grabbed Croft's gun arm, twisting it, smashing his fist into the deputy's face. Harris stumbled back, drawing his own weapon. Eli didn't wait. He threw Croft into Harris, sending them both to the floor. He drew his own Colt. "Stay down." He backed out of the office, his gun steady. "You should have taken the deal, Silas!" He burst onto the street. He didn't run for Stonewall. He ran to the horse trough, untied the first 2 horses he saw, and slapped them hard. They bolted, scattering men in the street. In the confusion, he reached Stonewall, grabbed his rifle, and mounted. A shot rang out from the office. A bullet whined past his head. He dug his heels in, galloping out of Helena. a posse already forming behind him. He rode Stonewall into a lather, the sound of the pursuit falling away as he took to the high, dangerous trails. He got back to the valley as the sky turned a deep, bruised purple. He didn't bother with the signal. He hammered on the door. "It's me! Let me in!" The bar was thrown back. Lydia pulled the door open, her face white with terror. "What happened?" He stumbled in, slamming the door, barring it himself. He was breathing hard, not from the ride, but from rage. "It failed," he said, his voice ragged. The women gathered, their faces falling. "Silas is with him. He's corrupt. The whole town. They're coming. Harris, Silas, Croft, probably Pike. They're coming for all of us." Annabelle clutched her hands. "The letters." "They don't care," Eli spat. "They chose the railroad over the truth." He checked his rifle, ejecting the spent shell from his ride out. "There's no more running. There's no more deals. This is it, a last stand." Rosa closed her eyes for a second, a silent prayer. Then she opened them, and her face was hard. She picked up the shotgun. Annabelle took the spare rifle. Claire took the Colt. Lydia stood, shaking, her hands empty. "Lydia," Eli said, his voice soft but firm. You load for all of us. You keep your head down. You just load." She nodded, her fear giving way to a grim resolve. They took their positions at the reinforced windows, plunging the cabin into near darkness, lit only by the low fire. They waited. The night deepened. The only sound was the wind and the pop of the fire. Eli stood at the front window, his rifle resting on the oak shutter. He felt Lydia come up behind him. She didn't speak, just stood near him, her warmth a small comfort in the cold dark. "You look tired, Eli," she whispered. "I'll sleep when it's over," he said, his eyes on the moonlit snow. She was quiet for a long time. Then her voice, small and trembling, cut through the silence. "Eli, that night, what we all—" "It happened," he said. If we live through this," she took a shaky breath. "What happens tomorrow? When this is done? What happens to us?" She looked at him, her eyes searching his in the dim light. "Will you keep me?" The question was so raw, so bare. It struck him deeper than any bullet. He turned from the window, his gaze taking in the room. Annabelle, oiling the rifle mechanism, her face a mask of concentration. Claire, staring at the door, still as a statue. Rosa, sitting in her chair, the shotgun across her lap. He looked back at Lydia. He reached out, his rough hand touching her face, his thumb brushing her cheek. "I'm not just keeping you, Lydia," he said, his voice rough with an emotion he didn't know he had. "All of you," he whispered. "This is your home now, if you'll have me." She didn't kiss him. She just closed her eyes and leaned into his hand, her own coming up to cover it. "We'll have you," she whispered back. A shout from outside shattered the moment. "Ward, this is Sheriff Silas." "Come out with your hands high, send out the women. Do it now, and I'll speak for you." Eli let go of Lydia. He turned back to the window slit. "He's lying," he whispered. He shouted back, "This is private property. Sheriff, I've got women here. We don't want trouble." "Trouble found you. Ward," a different voice yelled. "Harris, send out Annabelle, and we'll let the others live." "Go to hell," Eli roared. The world exploded. A volley of gunfire erupted, shattering the night. Bullets thudded into the oak shutters, whining through the gaps. The cabin filled with the smell of sulfur and splintered wood. "Down," Eli yelled. A man tried to rush the porch. Eli lined up his shot and fired. The man screamed and dropped. "Back window!" Rosa yelled. She fired the shotgun, the blast deafening in the small room. A crash, and another scream from outside. "They're flanking!" Annabelle called from the side. She fired, the rifle bucking against her shoulder. "Got one! Reloading!" Lydia called, her hands moving fast, pushing cartridges into the spare rifle. The fight was a chaotic nightmare of noise and smoke. They were heavily outnumbered. Eli saw a flicker of movement by the barn. Pike, the bounty hunter, was trying to get behind them, to set the barn on fire. "Claire," Eli yelled. "Left side, the barn!" Claire moved to the other window, her movements fluid, economical. She raised the Colt, her arms steady. She waited. Pike broke cover, a torch in his hand. Claire fired. The pistol bucked. Pike stopped, looked down at his chest in surprise, and fell face first into the mud. Claire lowered the gun. "That was my last bullet," she said, her voice completely calm. "Fire!" Silas roared from outside. "Burn them out!" They heard the splash of kerosene against the front wall. "No," Eli whispered. They were going to be burned alive. "We're going out. We run for the barn. It's our only chance." He kicked the bar away from the door. "Rosa, Annabelle, fire as you move." "Lydia, stay on my back. Claire, use this." He tossed her his boot knife. "Now!" He kicked the door open, firing his rifle from the hip. A man on the porch, holding the kerosene can, crumpled. They poured out into the chaos. The yard was full of smoke and shouting men. Sheriff Harris, his face twisted in rage, saw Annabelle. He raised his pistol. "You're mine!" Annabelle screamed and fired, but her shot went wild. Eli, seeing her, didn't hesitate. He launched himself at Harris, tackling him, sending them both crashing into the mud. Sheriff Silas, seeing Eli on the ground, rushed him. He was a big man, and he pulled Eli off Harris, throwing him hard against the cabin wall. Eli's rifle skittered away. "You should have stayed alone, rancher," Silas snarled, drawing a long knife from his belt. He lunged. This was it. Not a gunfight, but a brawl in the mud. Eli was a scout, fast and wiry. Silas was a brute, heavy and strong. Eli ducked under the first slash, driving his shoulder into Silas's gut. The sheriff grunted, bringing his fist down on Eli's back. Eli fell, Silas on top of him, the knife glinting. They rolled, wrestling for the blade. Eli felt a sharp, searing pain as the knife grazed his ribs. He roared, smashing his forehead into Silas's nose. There was a crack of bone. Silas bellowed, his grip loosening. Eli saw the sheriff's pistol, still holstered. He couldn't reach it. Silas raised the knife again. Eli smashed his fist into the sheriff's bloody face. Once, twice. He was fueled by a primal rage, the need to protect what was inside the cabin. He hit him again. Silas went limp, his body slumping, half broken, choking on his own blood. The yard went silent. The remaining deputies, seeing Sheriff Harris on the ground with a broken leg, seeing Sheriff Silas beaten and unconscious, and seeing Pike dead, lost their nerve. He's insane," one of them whispered. "It ain't worth the money," another said. They grabbed Croft, who was wounded, and began to back away. Eli staggered to his feet, caked in mud, blood streaming from his side and his mouth. He was a terrifying sight. He picked up Silas's pistol. He walked over to where Silas was stirring, groaning. He pressed the barrel of the gun to the sheriff's forehead. Silas froze. His one good eye widened in terror. "Wait," he gurgled. "Please." He had surrendered. "You're going to ride out of here," Eli said, his voice a low, gravelly rasp. "You're going to take Harris. You're going to take your dead and your wounded. You're going to tell everyone the bounty hunters were ambushed by bandits. You're going to tell them the women died in the wreck. You're going to post their bounties as paid. You will tell the world this valley is empty. Or," Silas whispered, trembling. "Or you die here," Eli said, "and I'll take these letters to the federal marshal. I'll tell him I was attacked by a corrupt sheriff and his thugs, and I'll show him your grave." He stared down at the man. "Walk away, or die here." "I'll walk," Silas choked out. "I'll walk. We have a deal." Eli stepped back. He watched as the terrified deputies loaded their leaders onto their horses. They rode out of the valley, a beaten, shambling retreat, leaving their dead behind. Eli stood in the yard, his chest heaving. The cabin was smoking, riddled with bullets. The four women came to stand beside him. Annabelle, her face smeared with gunpowder. Rosa, her hands shaking. Claire, holding the knife. And Lydia, who ran to him, her hands hovering, afraid to touch his wounds. The threat was over. For now. Weeks later, the spring thaw began. It was not a gentle process. It was a violent breaking, a cracking of the ice on the river, a surge of meltwater that turned the valley floor into a muddy swamp. The snow, which had been their white fortress, retreated up the slopes, revealing the scarred, wounded land beneath. The ranch was changed. The bullet holes in the cabin walls were plugged with new, pale oak dowels, scars that would never fade. The blood stain on the porch had been scrubbed away by Annabelle, but the wood itself was darker in that spot. A permanent memory of the night Silas fell. Eli had buried the dead. He had taken the pack mule and dragged the bodies of Pike and the two deputies high into the canyon, burying them under a rock slide. He did the work alone. The women had offered, but he had refused. It was his work to do. He was sealing the valley, burying the past in the cold, wet earth. The women remained. They were no longer fugitives, but they were still haunted. Silas had kept his word. Word had come back from Helena, a formal decree posted in the town, declaring the bounties paid, the cases closed. The official story was the one Eli had fed him. The women had been lost, presumed dead in the storm, and the bounty hunters, Pike included, had been killed by an unknown band of robbers. It was a clean, neat lie, but freedom was not the same as peace. Lydia still woke from nightmares, her hands clenched. But now, when she cried out, it was Rosa's hand that found hers. Or she would feel Eli's steady presence in the room, and the fear would recede. Claire still cleaned the Colt pistol Eli had given her, but she also learned to use his rifle, her eyes sharp and true. Annabelle no longer paced like a caged animal, but her fiery energy was coiled tight, looking for a purpose. They began to build, not just to survive. Rosa, the heart of their new, strange family, claimed the earth behind the cabin. She found the patch of land Eli had once tried to turn into a garden. She took a spade and, with her own hands, began to turn the soil. Eli, seeing her, brought the plow mule and worked the land for a full day, breaking the stubborn, rocky ground. Rosa planted. She had Eli buy seeds in town, corn, beans, potatoes, and herbs. She tended the small green shoots with a fierce, maternal devotion. She was replanting her roots. She kept the cabin, managing their supplies, her quiet authority bringing order to the chaos. She was the foundation. Annabelle was the fire. She refused to be idle, refused to be a burden. On one of Eli's supply runs to Helena, she went with him. She walked into the general store, her head high, the whispers of the townsfolk following her like static. She ignored them. She had seen the hard-bitten ranchers, the tired wives, the lack of comforts. She used the last of the money she had stolen from Harris. The money Eli had insisted was hers to keep. She did not buy Passage East. She bought lye, heavy copper tubs, and bars of soap. Back at the ranch, she set up a business. At first, it was just for them. She established a proper bathhouse in a partitioned section of the barn, a hip tub, a small stove for heating water. It was a cleansing. Then, she posted a sign at the valley crossroads. Ward Ranch Laundry and Bath. Honest coin for honest work. Ranchers, wary at first, began to come. They brought their stiff, filthy clothes. Annabelle washed, mended, and pressed. She charged a fair price. Soon, they began to pay for the bath, 10 cents for a tub of hot water. It was the only such comfort for 50 miles. She kept a ledger, her handwriting neat and sharp. She was earning honest coin, and she found she was good at it. She was the provision. Lydia was the future. When other families, ranchers who had hidden deep in the side canyons during the storm, began to reemerge, they saw the changed Ward Ranch. They saw a home, not a hermit's cabin. They had children, small, weather-beaten children with no schooling. Lydia, her shyness warring with a new, quiet resolve, offered to teach. Eli cleared the main room of the cabin for 3 hours every morning. It became a school. 5 children, then 7, would arrive on muleback. Lydia, who had once believed her life was over, found her voice. She taught them their letters, their numbers, how to read from the few books Eli owned. She was gentle, and she was patient. The preacher's daughter, cast out by a man of God, had found her own calling. She was the hope, and Claire was the shield. She did not take to the cabin or to the town. She took to the land. She was Eli's shadow. She woke when he did, in the pre-dawn gray, and rode the range with him. She was a natural with the horses, her silence a balm to them. She learned to mend the fences, to track the cattle, to read the weather in the clouds. She was silent, but she was steady. She carried the rifle Eli had bought her, and she used it. She protected the herd from wolves, her aim true. Eli found he no longer looked over his shoulder. He trusted her with his back. They would sit on a ridge for an hour, watching the cattle graze, and not exchange a single word. It was a partnership forged in silence and survival. Eli found himself at the center of this new world, a reclusive man who was suddenly, profoundly, not alone. He found he loved them. He loved them all. It was not a simple, single thing. It was a complex, deep, and branching emotion. He loved Rosa for her endurance, for the quiet strength that made their house a home. He loved Annabelle for her fire, for her refusal to be broken, for the sharp mind that saw the world as it was and decided to build something anyway. He loved Lydia for her vulnerability, for the gentle courage that allowed her to teach children in the same room where she had once trembled in fear. And he loved Claire for her stillness, for the shared, unspoken understanding that passed between them, for the strength that matched his own. He was a man who had sought solitude to avoid the mess of the world, and he had found, in these 4 broken women, a new world worth the mess. The townsfolk in Helena still whispered, when Eli rode in for supplies. Now with Claire at his side or Annabelle at the wagon, the judgment was thick. That's Ward's harem, they'd mutter in the saloon. Lives in sin with 4 doxies. But the whispers began to fade. No one dared cross Eli Ward. They remembered the rumors of the gunfight. They saw the way Claire handled her rifle, her eyes missing nothing. They saw that the Ward ranch was prospering. Annabelle's laundry was reliable. Lydia's school was the only one in the territory. Rosa's garden began to produce a surplus, which she sold. The Ward ranch became a point of stability. Not scandal, slowly, grudgingly. Judgment faded into usefulness. One Sunday, late in the summer, a traveling preacher arrived in Helena. He set up in the town's new, half-built meeting hall. Word spread to the valleys. Annabelle heard it first, from a ranch wife delivering laundry. She brought the news back to the cabin. "A preacher," she said, her voice neutral. Lydia went still, her hands pausing in the bread dough she was kneading. "We should go," Rosa said quietly. Eli looked up from the harness he was mending. "You don't have to. I know," Lydia said, her voice soft but firm. She looked at Eli, at Rosa, at Annabelle, at Claire. "I want to—" That Sunday, they rode into town, all 5 of them, Eli, tall on Stonewall, the 4 women in the buckboard wagon, wearing their mended, clean dresses. They walked into the meeting hall. The room, filled with ranchers and townsfolk, went silent. Every eye turned to them, the reclusive rancher and his 4 women. Eli ignored them. His gaze fixed ahead. He led them to the back pew. They sat. Lydia sat tall, her hands folded in her lap. She looked at the preacher, a young, earnest man with a loud voice. He spoke of sin and damnation, of the fires of hell that awaited the wicked. The Lydia of 6 months ago would have trembled, would have believed he was speaking of her. The Lydia of today just listened. She felt the warmth of Rosa on one side, the sharp, solid presence of Annabelle on the other. She looked at Eli and Claire, sitting at the end of the pew, a wall of quiet strength. The preacher spoke of redemption, of the need to be washed clean. Lydia looked down at her own hands, dusted with flour and ink. She was already clean. She had been washed clean by fire, by work, by belonging. She did not need this man's absolution. When the service ended, they stood. They walked out, together, heads high, unashamed. They had faced the world, and it had not broken them. That night, the air was warm, the valley settling into the rhythm of late summer. They sat by the fire, The cabin door opened to the breeze. Eli had bought a fiddle in town, a surprise for Lydia. He had seen her admiring it in the general store. She played, her fingers clumsy at first, then finding the memory of tunes she had known as a child. She played a soft lullaby, a simple, aching melody that filled the cabin. Eli sat on the floor, leaning against the wall, his long day on the range settling into his bones. The wound in his side still pulled when the air was damp. A constant reminder. Rosa was knitting, her needles clicking in a quiet rhythm with the music. Annabelle, finished with her ledger, moved behind Eli. Her strong hands began to work the muscles in his shoulders, her touch knowing, possessive. She leaned down, her red hair brushing his cheek, and pressed a soft, warm kiss to the side of his neck. Claire, who had been sitting by the hearth, watching the flames, moved. She sat down beside Eli, close, so their shoulders and hips touched. She leaned her head against his shoulder, a simple, profound gesture of trust. She closed her eyes, listening to the fiddle. Eli looked at them. He saw Rosa, her face softened by the firelight. He saw Annabelle, her hand resting on his shoulder. He saw Claire, leaning against him. He saw Lydia, her face serene as she played, her eyes meeting his across the room. This was them. He cleared his throat, his voice rough. "This is our home now," he said, the words heavy, absolute. "No more hiding." The fiddle music stopped. Lydia smiled, a slow, radiant smile that lit her face. Later, when the moon was high, they took the blankets outside. The stars were a brilliant, burning spray across the blackness, more stars than any of them had ever seen. They lay together, a tangle of limbs and blankets, looking up at the vast, open sky. There was soft laughter. Annabelle told a sharp, funny story about a customer. Lydia hummed the lullaby. Eli pointed out the constellations he had learned as a scout. It was peaceful. It was safe. A kiss was shared in the warm darkness. It was not a kiss of passion or of ownership. It was a kiss of warmth, of shared breath, of homecoming. It was a kiss that belonged to no one, and to all of them. Thank you for listening to our story. We'd love to hear from you. Comment below and let us know where in the world you're listening from. Be sure to subscribe to From Wild West for more stories like this, and share your thoughts with us in English.